How many of you have ever tried to excuse your sin, like made yourself feel better by going, well, it's not that big of a deal, or I was just tired, or everyone makes a mistake, or I tried my best. Growing up in the church, that's something I had learned. I got really good at excusing my sin. I was very good at seeing sin in other people, but then with my own sin, I'd always have an excuse for it. That's why I love Romans 7, because actually, when I was in high school, God used Romans 7 to break me. Because in it, Paul's talking about his sin. And he's talking about how if it weren't for the law, if it weren't for him understanding God's holy standard, that he wouldn't have seen his sin. But because of that, he saw his sin. And because of this, of his reaction to the law, when he'd see the law, it just make him want to sin more. And then he goes through, and it sounds like he's like arguing with himself. And as I read it, it made me realize what was happening within me, that I was wrestling with sin because I was in ministry, I was in leadership at my church, but I had hidden sin in my life that I didn't want to deal with. And I read Romans 7, and he talked about the thing I want to do, I don't do, and the things I don't want to do, those are the things I do. And he goes back and forth, and there's this wrestle within him. And it's the wrestle that we have with sin. And he finally gets to a point, and he says, "Wretched man that I am, who can set me free from this body of death?" And he says, "Thanks be to Jesus. Through him is freedom." And then Romans 8, which you're going to be reading today, starts by saying, "There is therefore." And whenever there's a therefore in the Bible, it means it ties to the last chapter. And it says, "There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus." You've probably heard that verse a lot. But what we don't talk about a lot is that it's tied to Romans 7. That in order to get to the place of freedom that we read about in Romans 8, which is beautiful, you're going to read it today, and it's such a beautiful picture of freedom. But in order to get there, we have to go through facing our sinfulness and facing our need for Jesus. Maybe you're like me and you grew up in the church and you've put on a good Christian mask and kind of like, well, I'm the good kid. And you haven't came face to face with your sinfulness yet. Or maybe you're at the place where you're face to face with your sinfulness and you don't want to look at it because you're like, oh, I don't like the way that feels. I want to challenge you today. Face your sinfulness because God will give you a gift in it. When we see our utter need for God and we get down on our knees and we say, "God, I'm sinful, but I need you. I'm broken, but I need you," then we'll get the picture of Romans 8 that you're going to read today. So as you read Romans 8, before you get to Romans 8, I want you to take some time and I want you to actually focus on your sinfulness and let God show you his grace. See your need for Jesus. And then Romans 8 and the life of freedom will be open to you.